U.S. President-elect Donald Trump meets President Barack Obama at the White House as work begins on the clean transfer of power. The election of Donald Trump as the next U.S. president triggers street protests across America. And foreign policy experts expect Trump to change Washington's approach towards some of the world's most pressing issues. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. At this hour, U.S. President Barack Obama and President-elect Donald Trump are meeting at the White House to discuss a smooth transition of power ahead of the January 20th inauguration. As the dust settles on one of the most divisive and acrimonious presidential elections in American history, the nation's political power brokers are urging acceptance and reconciliation in the wake of Trump's stunning victory. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone reports.
Democrat Hillary Clinton, who hoped to become the first woman president, officially conceded Wednesday, hours after Donald Trump claimed a victory that will make him the 45th president of the United States on January 20th. Clinton told her supporters, "We owe him an open mind and a chance to lead."
We have seen that our nation is more deeply divided than we thought. But I still believe in America, and I always will. And if you do, then we must accept this result and then look to the future.
Following on Clinton's conciliatory tone, President Barack Obama made a brief statement at the White House urging a divided country to rally behind Trump as the country's next commander-in-chief.
We're not Democrats first. We're not Republicans first. We are Americans first. We're patriots first. We all want what's best for this country. That's what I heard in Mr. Trump's remarks last night. That's what I heard when I spoke to him directly, and I was heartened by that.
Trump's conciliatory note came in his victory speech early Wednesday.
For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people, I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country.
Trump will have the benefit of a Republican-controlled Congress, a prospect that excites House Speaker Paul Ryan.
He connected in ways with people no one else did. He turned politics on its head. And now, Donald Trump will lead a unified Republican government.
Trump owes his victory in large part to a surge of white working-class voters frustrated with economic issues, says expert Norman Eisen.
Discontent with the lingering effects of the financial collapse of 2008 and of the transformation of the American economy and the impact that has had on workers and on average folks over the past decades.
Pre-election polls gave Clinton an edge, and that will lead to a lot of soul-searching for pollsters and political analysts, says Molly Reynolds.
Were the polls asking the right questions of the right voters? Were we accurately measuring how likely voters are to vote? And just sort of really digging into what it is about the polling data that led us all to kind of make a different prediction than what was actually realized.
As Clinton exits the political stage, Trump must now focus on forming a new administration. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
Well, the election of Donald Trump as the next president of the United States did not sit well with thousands of protesters who filled the streets of a number of large cities Wednesday. Now, the demonstrations were peaceful but loud, with shouts of "No Trump, no racist USA" echoing off skyscrapers. A large crowd packed New York City's Fifth Avenue directly in front of the Trump Towers, waving signs reading "Love Trump's Hate."
Well, I believe the United States has made a terrible mistake. I think that Americans have been very naive to very strong shifts of governments to the right throughout the Western world. and a lot of other parts of the world, and they did not foresee that that was what's going on right now. So they essentially have found themselves in an incredibly difficult situation, and also the rest of the world is incredibly nervous.
Well, another group of protesters gathered across from Trump's soon-to-be home, the White House in Washington.
I am terrified. I come from a family of political refugees from Cuba, and I'm very grateful to this country for having accepted us. And I'm terrified.
Well, demonstrators also blocked traffic in Chicago, marched through downtown Philadelphia and Boston. On the West Coast, there were protests in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle. Well, Russia warmly welcomed Donald Trump's election win, with officials, analysts, and ordinary citizens cautiously hoping it might turn a new page in U.S.-Russia relations. As viewers Daniel Sheff reports from Moscow, Russian analysts said there are still many unknowns about Trump and whether his campaign rhetoric would translate into policy.
A mock election organized by the U.S. Embassy in Moscow was quickly overtaken by startling results in the real presidential race.
Well, I think for some people it was disbelief. Some people have always maintained that if Trump looked like he was going to win, his victory would be stolen by the American elite. Now, this has not happened. And that sends a message to, including to the people in the Kremlin, that democracy works in America.
Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated Trump, saying he hoped to work together with the next American president to lift relations out of the current crisis. On the streets of Moscow, Trump's victory was welcomed by most Russians.
It seems to me he is a worthy representative, will make a good president, and the relations with Russia will get better.
But Russian media coverage and praise for Trump during his campaign raised expectations for a man unknown to politics, who was not supposed to win, and whose policies are not yet clear.
Because they have already created another Trump. He's good, you know, he likes Putin, Putin likes him. Nothing is absolutely sure. It's too early to try to impose such things, you know, on the leaders. Nevertheless, you know, even on the TV, they say, oh, Trump is our guy, you know. Absolutely wrong.
Regardless of hopes and expectations, a U.S. led by Donald Trump begins a new chapter in relations with Russia. Daniel Sheff, VOA News, Moscow.
As we've mentioned, President Obama and President-elect Trump are laying the groundwork for the smooth transition of power. Now, the quiet and massive process happens in the White House, within the campaigns, and in the various government agencies. VOA's Keida Kostrecci has more.
We have chosen hope over fear.
The presidential transition in the United States ensures that there is no gap in governing. Stephen Wayne is a professor of government at Georgetown University.
Yes, and the whole idea of the transition is to maintain that stability while you change to the policy direction of the winning candidate.
The Center for Presidential Transition at the Partnership for Public Service is helping this year's candidates be ready to govern from day one, should they win.
Presidential transitions, they've always been big and complex and a period of vulnerability for the country, but we feel when managed strategically, it provides one of the greatest opportunities to make government more effective.
Legacy of service.
Transition teams gather information, sift names for cabinet posts and other political positions in the new administration, and coordinate with the White House. The transition process has been designed to be immune to the animosity of a campaign.
So elections divide, but after the election you have to come together. And the government still operates, people still demand services.
But a smooth transition also means that institutions are sound.
So helping the new people take over, even if you didn't like them, even if you didn't vote for them, is very, very important.
Wayne says the best transition he has seen was from Republican President George W. Bush to Democrat Barack Obama in 2008. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says Obama and his team benefited tremendously from that transition.
I think it did reflect a commitment to professionalism and democracy that that President Obama and his team is determined to live up to.
Congress enacted the first Transition Act in 1963 during the presidency of John F. Kennedy. But with the Kennedy assassination and Lyndon Baines Johnson taking over and later winning the election, the first formal transition did not happen until 1968, when Richard Nixon became president. Keita Kostrezi, VOA News, Washington.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCauley. Coming up, Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential race sends chills through the United Nations climate talks in Morocco. Stay with us.
Green Beat for a healthier planet.
Not all flowers are a welcome sight. The invasive water hyacinth is soaking up 2 to 4 liters a day of water in Iraq's Tigris River, which is already plagued by drought, pollution, and too much salinity. So engineer Khaldoun Rahim says the flower is being physically removed.
The Directorate of Irrigation and Drainage has started clearing and moving the Nile flower from the Al Shirta Canal with an area of 200,000 square meters.
The water hyacinth can double in size in a matter of weeks. Allah Hussein Abbas is with the Directorate of Irrigation and Drainage.
These plants hinder the work of the water purification and treatment stations, electrical power and oil stations. They block the flow of water.
Invasive plant species are a huge issue worldwide. According to the U.S. Forest Service, some invasive plant species decrease the diversity of native plants and degrade the natural habitats of animal species. I'm Rebecca Ward for VOA's Green Beat.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madou with details on a new type of HIV test. Lino.
That's right, Vince. And scientists in Britain have developed a type of HIV test using a USB stick that can give a fast and highly accurate reading of how much virus is in a patient's blood. The device uses a drop of blood to detect HIV. It then creates an electrical signal that can be read by a computer, laptop, or handheld device. The researchers say the technology, although still in the early stages, could allow patients to regularly monitor the virus levels in a similar way to diabetes patients checking their blood sugar levels. Current tests to detect virus levels take at least 3 days. A new research report says refugee children arrive in the United States with diverse health and nutritional needs, which can have long-term consequences for their development and well-being. Using data from a medical screening examination of nearly 1,000 children under age 10 who were resettled in Washington state during a 2-year period, researchers found that nearly half suffered from malnutrition. They compared children under age 5 in this refugee group to low-income children of the same age in Washington state and found that a greater portion of the refugee children suffered from stunting, while a smaller share were overweight at the time of resettlement. Their findings was published in a new Migration Policy Institute report, The Nutritional Health of Young Refugee Children Resettling in Washington state. Now joining us in the studio for more on the subject is Randy Capps, Director of Research, U.S. Programs with the Migration Policy Institute. Mr. Capps, welcome to Africa 54.
Hi, thanks for having me on the program today.
Incredible findings, actually, when I was going through the report. Wasting more prevalent among young Somalis, for example, by 23%, and stunting more prevalent among young Somalis by 26%. Of course, the research was conducted among other children, Iraqi and Burmese. Tell us about these findings. What did you find really surprising there?
Well, sure. And first, I have to credit the report's authors, led by Beth Dawson-Hahn at University of Washington. So they really put this together. I mean, this is the first sophisticated sampling that's been done of nutritional status among refugee children coming to the United States. And I do think that the findings for the Somali children stand out. They are the most likely to be severely undernourished, to have severe underweight, which is referred to as wasting. among the groups included in the study, a much higher rate than we see in the general U.S. population.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of studies that we've seen of refugees are focused very often on young children from birth to age 5, and the data actually that I mentioned earlier were for that age range. The study also looked at children aged 5 to 10, and for example, 24% of Somali children are confronted with waste. I mean, they are experiencing wasted as well. So why was it important to shed a light on that age range?
Well, you have children of all ages that are resettled to the United States. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we think among the Somali refugees coming to the United States, more than half of them are children. And what this report shows is, wasting it's most severe for the youngest kids, right? It's an issue with infant mortality among very young children. But what this report shows is also an ongoing issue for children when they get older. And there are a lot of children living in the refugee camps and elsewhere in Africa that have the severe malnutrition that are going to be coming to the United States at some point.
So to what extent does this issue call for concern?
Well, it is a big concern. I know in the refugee resettlement world, it's a very big concern. The United Nations is concerned about it. They've developed special packets for food just to treat it that they give children in refugee settings. It's a longer-term concern, of course, for children's health and well-being and development. If they stay there in their refugee setting or even after they arrive in the United States.
So when you think about it, though, some may say that people that are refugees here, children in particular, as we're talking about them, maybe have a better chance of addressing these issues as opposed to resettling in other places. When we look at Kenya, that is hosting so many refugees, what do you think in terms of the refugees that are here that really they have in terms of some of the benefits that other refugees may not have?
We resettle in the United States about 70,000, now it's up to 85,000, and it's supposed to go up to 100,000 refugees per year, but there's hundreds of thousands in some refugee camps in Kenya alone. So we resettle a small percentage of the total to start with. But we have a commitment, and we have a very strong U.S. government program combined with the private sector that provides basic health services, health screening, training for the parents, all the things that people need to settle in their lives here. Okay. So once they get to the United States, they'll have a whole range of services, but those people providing the services, they need good information. They need to know about the health of these children when they arrive.
And one of the recommendations, quickly, because we're out of time, talks about addressing the entire spectrum of malnutrition.
Yes, that's correct. And the other issue, as you mentioned, is stunting, which is being too short for age. That has long-term health consequences. Children need a much better balanced diet, which is a little more difficult to address in the long run.
Okay, Mr. Capps, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the program.
And that was Randy Capps. He's Director of Research, U.S. Programs with the Migration Policy Institute. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter @Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Vincent.
Well, Lenore, thank you very much. Now be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health updates every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Well, Donald Trump's victory in the U.S. presidential race sent chills through the United Nations climate talks ongoing in Morocco. The summit aims to put policy details on last year's landmark Paris Climate Accord. But U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has pledged to tear up that agreement to reopen coal mines and push ahead with shale oil and gas projects. Here's Henry Ridgewell.
The Block Island Wind Farm, America's first offshore turbines, becomes operational this month, sending electricity to 17,000 homes. In the 8 years it has taken to build, the US has taken a lead role in fighting climate change.
One of the reasons why we have the momentum that we currently see, why we have Paris and the fast ratification of Paris, has been US leadership.
The Paris Agreement seeks to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, largely through reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump vowed to tear up the deal within 100 days of taking office and refocus on US energy independence.
We're going to put the miners back to work. We're going to put the miners back to work. We're going to get those mines open.
A U-turn by Washington could undermine global efforts to reduce emissions.
Taking that leadership role away would create a vacuum. That's no question about that. The good news, if there is good news, is that once the Paris Agreement is in force, as it now is, and the US is a member of it, leaving it is quite a lot more difficult than never joining it.
Delegates gathering at UN climate talks in Morocco fear their progress could be undone.
If he withdraws, it means everything is going backwards and it will not be good for the world.
Back at Block Island, campaigners hope wind power will endure.
I gotta believe that the arguments for offshore wind are so strong that it will transcend any administration.
Observers say the full impact of the Trump victory on climate policy won't be known for several months, leaving an uncertain future for the Paris Agreement. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
When President-elect Trump moves into the White House, he will work shoulder to shoulder with leaders of NATO's top member states who happen to be women. Now, during the campaign, Trump was accused of having a disrespectful attitude to women. The concern adds to a question of whether he will sustain the U.S. commitment to defend members of the world's most powerful alliance. Well, VOA Europe correspondent Luis Ramirez reports.
Trump stunned the alliance and defense analysts when he told the New York Times the U.S. would defend NATO members against Russian aggression only if they paid their fair share in contributions to the alliance.
Donald Trump and what he represents with respect to NATO in particular is dangerous. He is going straight at the heart of the alliance, and even the idea of calling that into dispute, I think, terrifies a lot of particularly the Eastern European countries.
But analysts like Chung say it is not only his stance on NATO that gets the president-elect off to a shaky start with alliance members. His disrespectful remarks about women during the campaign could make for some awkward encounters with NATO's heavy hitters, including Britain's Theresa May and Germany's Angela Merkel.
I think that Mrs. May and Mrs. Merkel will be extremely professional and cordial. Having said that, it is difficult to imagine, as a woman, how one could overlook the things that he has said and the things that he has done.
To confront Donald Trump is going to be moving into meeting somebody from a very different world. Or not quite a different planet, but certainly a different world.
But there is general agreement that Trump, May, and Merkel have one thing in common. They're all business when it matters.
I think Mrs. Merkel, who in some ways I think is much more of a European than Theresa May is, I think she's going to regard Donald Trump as a kind of United States phenomenon in a way which just says this country, this extraordinarily rich and vital country, produces all kinds of ideas and people who are extraordinary in European terms.
What this extraordinary president-elect will mean for NATO will be seen in the months to come. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, London.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. After 8 years as U.S. Commander-in-Chief, what will President Obama's legacy be on Africa? We'll be right back.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
A bus on the streets of London. It looks ordinary enough, but when viewed through an infrared camera, the image reveals pollutants the human eye can't see. Andreas Zinsmeister is with FLIR Systems, which makes special imaging cameras used to check for carbon dioxide.
What we recognized is that we have the ability to make you see the invisible.
Being able to see where toxic fumes linger could be invaluable to public health, says Professor Martin Williams of King's College.
Technologies that help people to visualize these things are really going to help to get the message across.
Andreas Zinsmeister says it's difficult right now to put CO2 imaging in a smartphone. However,
if technology really moves forward and we assume that it might fit in smaller devices, that would definitely be interesting to look into first.
The World Health Organization recently reported that air pollution is linked to millions of premature deaths worldwide. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Well, President Obama is preparing to leave the White House. He is the son of an African. His father was Kenyan, and many in Africa have considered Obama one of their own. So after 8 years in office, what will the president's legacy be on the continent? VOA's Jill Craig reports from Nairobi.
Hopes were high in Africa when President Barack Obama took office. Perhaps too high, suggests Kenyan political commentator Barack Muluka.
If we in Africa were looking up to him to come with a magic wand to solve our problems, then I think our expectations were misplaced. He was not the president of Africa. He has been the president of the United States of America, elected by American citizens, and his foreign policy would be governed first and foremost by American interests.
As president, Obama made 4 trips to sub-Saharan Africa, visiting 6 countries. He has challenged African governments on issues like human rights. He set the tone during his first visit in 2009 to Ghana when he said Africa doesn't need strong men, it needs strong institutions. A highlight of his Africa foreign policy has been his emphasis on trade, not just aid.
I think President Obama built a framework for the U.S. corporate sector to get engaged with Africa by consistently engaging through the business councils and so forth. It sort of de-risked Africa in a lot of U.S. corporate minds, and I think that was an important achievement that the president made.
Obama also made a point of addressing African youth, a group he focused on throughout his time in office. Here he is in Kenya in 2015.
And when it comes to the people of Kenya, particularly the youth, I believe there is no limit to what you can achieve.
And Obama's message of hope to Africa and its young people may be what defines his legacy here.
He's shown Africa a higher path, and I think he's done this generally. That's been his politics, that he's always lifted people's heads up and says, look where you can go. On first.
Obama launched the Young African Leaders Initiative in 2010 to help promising young people across the continent prepare for leadership positions. More than 250,000 people have joined the Yali network so far, and in 2016, 1,000 fellows attended leadership programs at U.S. colleges and universities. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words. Here is a word that is often used in stories about military or foreign policy.
Strategy.
For days, U.S. officials have talked about expanding airstrikes already happening in Iraq to Syria. It appears, however, that such action may be delayed, with President Obama on Thursday telling reporters he is still developing a strategy to deal with militants of the Islamic State, or ISIL.
A strategy is a plan to reach a major goal. It can relate to a military operation, a foreign policy, or even a business plan.
It takes time to complete. It is not about acting quickly. So the next time you hear the word strategy,
you will know what this news word means.